She gets
Okay.
excited easily. It's been a
How-
problem since a teenager.
And welcome to Dale Schafer Law Chats, a candid conversation with industry professionals on complex legal and business issues in the cannabis industry. I am Heather Schafer, legal assistant with the law offices of Dale Schafer and CEO of Agorasi Business Services. And you all know attorney Dale Schafer, 2-decade California cannabis attorney with a current focus on cannabis business law. Today we are chatting with JJ Pay. I'm so excited, of S2S Insurance. So tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Thanks, guys, for having me. I really appreciate that. Yeah, we started an all cannabis insurance brokerage that took on strictly just the cannabis insurance agency or industry for I think around about 4 years now. And about a year and a half ago, we started taking on hemp as well. After the 2018 Farm Bill, we saw that coming. So about 6 months before that, we started tackling on kind of things like crop coverage and liability. And a lot of the cannabis carriers decided to start kind of just transitioning over to that and said, well, plant's a plant. So let's just start kind of covering cannabis in that direction as under this new hemp term and name, even though it is all still one plant, and kind of been rolling since. So we have a large amount of clients that we've expanded and a large amount of products that we've been offering. And we'd like to just basically say from seed to sale, so we can cover kind of every aspect of the industry. And to this day, we're still not only like offering different coverages that a lot of people kind of maybe never even thought about or are kind of hard to find, but we've actually been having fun designing coverages. I think our latest glory here last month was designing 3 more crop coverages for hemp and THC outdoor that cover things like weather, pests, and many other things, wildfire, smoke damage, things like that we see that are pretty detrimental to a business going down just because of one risk. So that's kind of been our fun little show that we've been having. And then there's a bunch of new stuff that we've been working on too. So it's been exciting for me because it's not the same old insurance, boring business stuff, even though that we can do that and we kind of run those through our systems. But it's an industry that's always growing, always surprising, and something that kind of speaks to our nature a little bit. So we enjoy it. We have a lot of fun. So thanks for having me, guys.
Okay, JJ. Well, you and I do this whenever we get around to we start talking about insurance. I was an insurance defense lawyer for years, so I get the sharp point of the spear when the risk turns into a reality and someone's got to pay. And we backed up to the beginning as we start looking at the business of building, where we're going to need coverage, who's going to get it, what's it going to cost, and punch the numbers out. What I'm having discussions with people, industry people right now is COVID-19. Force majeure was, it really wasn't written to include a contagious disease. It hasn't been a huge risk that's been out there, so the policies weren't written for that contingency. And so I've been at the industrial relations places, the work comp board, the retirement boards, things like that with workers. And when someone has to go home, somebody gives them a check, and if the carrier doesn't pick it up, then someone, either a disability or unemployment, picks it up. But at some point, the piper gets paid. Can you tell me what you're seeing for people who don't have a job, for people who might make a claim that what's wrong with me is related to my employment somehow, and how that's being handled?
I would say, yeah, there's been a lot of talks about not only on the workers' comp side, but the business interruptions side with everything going on. And there's been a lot of claims that have been made through me and my colleagues that I talked to. And unfortunately, kind of like what you experience is there's always this part in your policy that really doesn't cover things like pandemics. I mean, it's really not a coverage that is widely thrown out there, and not a lot of people want to pay for that premium. We just recently actually created a pandemic insurance coverage that kind of blankets over many small businesses, because really it's the larger companies that had that. And through that claim process, they're able to kind of pay any losses and any issues that might come across from that. when it comes mostly to the workers' comp side, people do fall ill, and you do have some sort of health coverage and healthcare that can provide that a kind of assistance if you're a company that has that. But for the most part, people just kind of get laid off because there's a shortage of employment needs and worker-related issues. The comp claims coming from illness and from sickness hasn't been seen on the cannabis side, believe it or not. We haven't experienced a lot. We actually have a lot of comp policies in-house here, and we haven't gotten a single one of them. A few of my other colleagues actually haven't had them either. People have been pretty well safe because cannabis is an essential business. There's a lot of retail guys out there, a lot of distribution guys out there. So I'd love to share light on some of that stuff, but there really hasn't been much coming across our desk for anything in that nature. And we haven't had any comp claims for people kind of suffering or illness, or maybe even in the worst cases, death. We do know that healthcare coverage has been covering those costs, as well as subsidized government programs too. So that's about the most we've experienced in touch. The rest of it has just been, do I have business interruption? Yes or no. Doesn't matter. We're going to file anyway and try to see if it sticks. And unfortunately, it doesn't, which is the real stressful part of it. So
I saw a publication put out by the insurance commissioner, which outlines in fairly clear terms, you have a responsibility to investigate claims. You can't just go, we're not taking that claim right now, we're not going to look into it. Are you seeing issues on the claims investigation side, the company denial side? Where are you seeing the problems getting claims to move through the system?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, I saw the same thing. Right before that, actually, it said that even collecting premiums had to be delayed out just because of the whole cause with, I mean, believe it or not, insurance still has, runs off the paper mail system in some ways, and a lot of offices. We have our LA offices closed down, so even we had some issues paying some carriers there for just a little while. And there was that whole notice that came out, and then immediately after, to what you were saying, is they said, "Hey, keep up the claims reporting side. Everybody's calling about BI. You have to push those through." What happened on our end, and what the notices that we got that a lot of people didn't realize, is that caused a lot of these carriers to become semi-unresponsive when it came to not only quoting, but trying to just get the word out on, just simple kind of communications. We had endorsements we had going through, we had binding we had going through, and when it came to simple communications between me and underwriters, it took me like sometimes a week to get any word back. And what I got was our people are transitioning, there's a lot of work happening right now, servers are crashing, like just so many causes and so many problems. And then immediately after, we got, hey, by the way, this carrier is not offering business income loss for quite some time. So we started seeing many quotes after that going, hey, you're not going to be able to get business income loss until something's cooled down. And the only thing that I can put my finger on the pulse for what that was the cause for, not to saying that it was definite, but I definitely understand kind of what they had to go through, is because they were getting so many calls and so many claims for business interruption. And then they had to spend all this time and effort to basically say, hey, you're not covered, but that causes a lot of people to look at these things. They have to take them very seriously. That warning that we got was these agents, basically trying to say, hey, you're not covered for it, so I wouldn't put in a claim. And unfortunately, you can't do that as a broker. If someone wants to file a claim, you have to do your job, and you have to go to the carrier and you have to say, listen, this person wants to file a claim. Can you advise us? We know it's not in their policy, but they need you to start filing, and they need you to spend your dollars and your time to start investigating in their policy why they don't have it, and report to their legal group, how come they don't have it, and where maybe they can file for something. So it's, as a policy is anywhere from sometimes 300 to 400 pages long. So even though you might think you don't have a business income loss claim, it's always good for a lawyer to start digging through that thing and saying, what can we claim here, if anything, that might not even be pandemic related? So there's a lot of other causes and issues that could cause for that.
Well, insurance is a contract that's written on risk, and they tap into pools of money, and that money is available based upon how present the risk is. And I remember when I was litigating, I get a case that someone's already filed, they would reserve a certain amount of money, and then if I needed more money, I had to go back to them. but the underwriting policy was written based upon a stable market analysis. Where's our risk? And what just happened was the COVID-19 took a giant dump on all actuarials. And I understand it because the insurance industry is set up to handle so many claims. You write a policy, I'm on the risk for this, I expect X number of claims, and you're set up to investigate and advise on X number of claims. Pick them up or take the steps to deny it without your exposure for bad faith denial, things like that. And all of a sudden it goes from 100 claims to 1,000. It's like the rush on the hospital. What I'm anticipating is that they'll muddle their way through this, because when you do read the declarations and the exclusions parts of these policies and you line them up to each other, the gears don't really mesh for a lot of what we're seeing right now.
Exactly.
So if it's excluded, or if you have a force majeure and the only thing they cover are listed risks, and this is not one of the listed risks, okay, well, it's excluded then by force of the contract, but you're the guy that can't pay your bills. So when we come out of this and we get some idea from OSHA, how do we open back up, and insurance is going to have to deal with people coming back in. If you're tested negative and you get sick, is that a work comp risk? You know, is it, if business is closed down again, because like Tyson, every 3 people in a line, every 3rd person has COVID and they're all coughing on each other. And all of a sudden Cal OSHA goes, you're done, you're closed down. Is that a business interruption, or is that the same, oh, you don't have coverage for the pandemic? I don't know if those risks have been actuated.
Yeah, there's actually another section which a lot of people can notice in the exclusion of their policies, which is actually government related. So if you have any part of a county or jurisdiction that comes in there and says shut it down, then that's actually not claimable, and that ends up kind of causing an issue too, because people don't have that clause in there. So that's one side of the coin. And I'd probably say the other side of it is that when things do come back on board, these insurance companies are going to want their money back. So expect that the rates are going to be higher, or expect that if you want business interruption and maybe you do want some sort of, pandemic clause in there, they might offer that, but for a very expensive premium. And they want to kind of capture what might be happening in phase 2, maybe in the fall or the winter, when kind of people gather in those groups or things are opened up. So they'll try to find a way to monetize it and try to get their money back off the losses that they took. But they definitely are sweating. The other flip coin is, remember that these insurance companies only have to hold a certain amount of money, and the rest of it, they play with it. They try to invest in it. And with these stock markets going up and down, they're just kind of sweating bullets right now and trying to figure out where the risk needs to be laid and played. So it's interesting to kind of watch, especially for where we're at. We're in excess surplus lines, which means that we deal with carriers with a ton of money. They're not so much sticking to like one line of coverage. They're not like the farmers and the state farms out there that kind of do the homeowners and the auto and some small business like auto shops. We have people that kind of really take some heavy bets. They want to come in here and cover like cannabis in the auto industry, which is a very, very high risk. And so they offer a really high premium, and they're just trying to kind of hedge their bets as best as possible and trying to kind of get in, fill up the risk pool and get out. And so it's a very risky game for these guys. And when you have this industry being deemed essential, yet the stock market being kind of all over the place, it's interesting to see how they're reacting. And how they're reacting is a very kind of like stop coverage over here, offer premium coverage over here. What are we going to offer in the fall? Are we going to change some things? And I can't describe it unless you're actually in the industry, unless you're actual broker, but you don't typically see this kind of stuff. You just see a stable risk. You just see somebody saying, hey, we're now covering this, send us as many leads as you can. And then maybe in a few years, they don't offer that coverage anymore. And now they're just pulling back coverage left and right. They're offering a different type of coverage over here. The premium rates are changing consistently. And I had one carrier change completely over from, they were changing from gross sales, they're rating you. And now they want to rate you off payroll. And you're like, what is happening? Like, why are they changing things completely around? And they're just shifting. They're just trying to shift as fast as they can, as quick as they can, because they're hedging bets. And yeah, so it's definitely interesting. I'm curious to see kind of almost how, people like in your position that you were in on the defensive lawyer side and going against these carriers, how they're going to react and how they're going to move forward with some of these businesses. They're just suffering. I mean, they're just really, really hurting right now, and they have some possible insurability. I would touch on one more thing, is that we have carriers not offering higher limits when it comes to certain types of coverages, because they're afraid that as a business has issues kind of sustaining itself or even trying to move forward right now during these economic hardships, that they might kind of claim some insurance frauds. They might have some issues where they say, hey, we got a product stolen, or there was a small fire or something going on, just so that they can kind of claim something and get through it that's not pandemic related. And we've had some issues with that right now hearing from carriers. So it's getting weird. Is a better way about putting it. It's getting weird.
Well, the current crisis, notwithstanding, you and I have constantly talked about the supply chain, and if we take the word cannabis out and call it widget, every other supply chain that grows an agricultural component to a consumable product has a panoply of coverage to choose from, typically multiple carriers. They have limits based on how much you want to pay, what your risk is, in that supply chain, are you still seeing gaps or limits that cause exposure to businesses that, as an attorney, I might want to identify and bring in, hold harmless and bridge around gaps and put the risk on who's creating the risk if I can't get insurance for? What are you seeing along those lines, JJ?
I would say that we see gaps, but my specialty is kind of filling in those gaps. So I would say that there's very little gaps with what I provide. And I'll give an example here in that just a second. But what I mainly see is that people just don't buy enough coverage. People kind of buy the basic, the bare minimum. Maybe they don't know what's out there. But for an example that I'll give you is that we just secured a coverage that we got from London that we kind of put together and pieced together. And it was to help secure product as it's going through a hemp processor. Because a hemp processor, even as a regular cannabis manufacturer, you take somebody's product in and you turn it over. Well, it's just a tolling job. It's not your product. So why do you have personal property of cannabis inventory for, $500,000 when it's not your property? That's not claim worthy. If your building goes up in fire or somebody steals it or anything, or something bad happens, you aren't going to be able to claim that. It's not your property. It's the person you're doing the job for. So we actually had to try to educate our clients on that and go, listen, you got to convince your client that they need to purchase a coverage, type of stock throughput coverage that covers that product as it's coming through your manufacturing and headed out the door. And then the other parts of it is just kind of like a simple bond or something that gets put in place. I had a recent issue where somebody had about $250,000 worth of product that was supposed to go through chromatography. It was contracted to go through chromatography, went through a lab, didn't go through chromatography, and ruined the whole thing. So, there's issues right there where they're like, hey, what can I claim? And I'm like, they got liability, you can sue them. So, it's the best thing you can do. And there's some contract protections. Other than that, I would say the last piece that I would always say the last piece of the puzzle, but it's really until I find something else to insure. The last little piece of the puzzle I'm really trying to kind of shore up is IP coverage. It's super, super important to me. There's no real trade organization out there that covers these cultivators that come up with these new strains, or, let's say you create a really good cherry wine strain that's just consistent across the board, that's covering, really low THC amounts and really good CBDs, CBGs, or a bunch of cannabinoids on the hemp space. And anybody can grab your seed. Anybody can go do what they want, and you can try to file and you can try to put up your patent, but it takes time for that kind of stuff. And in the meantime, I haven't really found any good IP coverage, any good IP insurance to have for protections or litigations across the board to make sure a company like Charlotte's Web or something like that is covered well. So there's those concerns that I have. Every other thing, I think that we're doing pretty well filling in those gaps. Supply chain wise, we actually just created a program that's called All Risk. So we can literally have somebody come in here and say, I know insurance isn't going to cover against thrips. right? Well, we actually created a type of captive partnership where we can take somebody in here and go grab a few lawyers and write your own policy if you really want to. There is one thing that you cannot do in this industry and claim against, and that is do something illegal. So it's about it at this point.
Okay. Well, I'm building some businesses from basically dirt right now. And one of the questions I have is that if I'm bringing onto a property, I'm bringing people from outside to do work. In any other industry, you can get a policy to cover the building phase, you know, the go to operation phase, a policy to cover the property for what you're actually doing. And I haven't really crossed that bridge yet. So if I got a big piece of property, I'm going to build cultivation canopy, a nursery, a processing facility, manufacturing. I can have my own transport only on that property with multiple things going on. I'm going to need different builder guys coming on, other people coming on the property that when they get hurt, you know, you can contract that with the independent contractors doing it, but there's still the risk that, you know, what if something happens that they don't pick up?
Mm-hmm.
Or I get wrapped into the stuff. You guys have anything like that you could write?
Yeah. So first off, I'd obviously put some sort of general liability on the business and on the land, and then I'd make sure that whatever contractor has some sort of builder's risk put in place. We could also do that for you. And the last little piece that we like to put up for larger situations like that is called the course of construction, and that means any liabilities that might happen during construction, as well as theft or issues that are caused when all that stuff is kind of sitting there in between building times. So that's what we've been placing on for some of these larger greenhouse operations that we had. And then there's even a type of bond you can actually get placed on there, a builder's bond that we can get put on that stuff. So
okay.
Yeah, we've been doing some pretty large greenhouse operations. Some of those greenhouses, I think the largest one I worked on was about $90 million, and that was just insane. And it took them 3 months to get that thing up. I mean, they just had so many bodies there. And at that point, as somebody from insurance side, you're looking at the risk of like, wow, you guys want to put that up in 3 months? There's a lot of stuff that can happen wrong and that going on. But they had a deadline and they had to move through the rain, sleet, and snow. So pretty crazy.
Well, one of the things we haven't crossed yet is, you know, the creative products liability claims, or just the run of the mill. Mm-hmm. And I know that when I talk to people who come up with their magic formulas, and I explained to them that, you know, you're designing a product right now. If that design hurts somebody, you know, you're on the risk, and we have a strict liability system. Anybody who designs it, manufactures it, or sells it. So the entire supply chain is going to be a defendant, and your defenses are, you know, it wasn't my design that caused this. I didn't really touch it, didn't really sell it, but you're still getting sued. And insurance companies, you know, I've handled them where they reserve a right, but we're going to give you counsel, or maybe we have Kuma's counsel come in, things like that, because we really don't think we cover this, but we don't want to get a bad faith claim if we don't. And those have just not gone out and been sent back as suits. I know that some of the plaintiffs' bar has talked about this. The vape crisis was basically an illegal, you know, product. So good luck with that. But that sort of thing can happen in this industry. What's the picture look like for products liability from seed to sale, if you will?
Yeah, products liability has probably been like my main like flagship that I kind of like steer when I talk to these clients of mine, because you're definitely right. Anybody from the cultivator side all the way down to the retailer side has to have products liability in some form. A lot of cultivators actually don't get it because they think once it just goes onto a manufacturer or distributor, not my problem. But really, when it comes down to it, everybody in the chain gets sued. As most lawyers know, you don't go after a single party. You shotgun everybody. You name everybody you can that's touched that product and has opened that product or messed with it in some form and fashion, because you don't know who's liable when something's going on. And for that, we try to make sure that product liability is affordable and very broad. When it comes to the vape side, as you can definitely see in multiple policies, there's a lot of exclusions. In fact, I think only until recently, last week, I actually finally got the first carrier to move forward on removing that vape exclusion. And what they did was they kept a health hazard in there for respiratory issues. So if there's a respiratory claim of something like that, then that part will be excluded. But as far as everything else goes, you can use foreign parts. You can make sure that whatever products you're using there is risk it, at your own risk. But just know that if you're doing something that you probably shouldn't be doing, like using the wrong ingredients with the wrong chemicals in there and hurting some of these people, hurting some of these guys' lungs, then you're going to have some issues running up against some of these policies here. For the most part, you just need to kind of cover your own butt. I mean, these manufacturers that we work with and a lot of my clients are extremely professional. They've been in the space for a long time. They might come from some traditional background where they've been making vape products for probably a better part of a decade. And they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing. So as long as you're kind of sticking by those standards and by those models, then the only thing you should really focus on are what are my defense limits to settle, to make sure that we can cover our bases here, or even how much money do we have because it's not our fault and we can push that buck onto the actual at fault person, but knowing that you're still going to probably get dragged through court for a little bit. And as you know, Dale, probably the most costly thing is they tell you, they walk in there, they say, you got a claim, shut it down. And that's really the part that hurts is the discovery portion of a claim, because you can't put a single, product out of your shelf anymore the moment you start hurting somebody. I'd probably say the case that I like to kind of look at, if anybody has to do research on kind of what that looks like, the first thing that I actually ever come across for product liability and was just unbelievable how much it cost them was a company called LiveWell out of Colorado. And they probably had the most, one of the most horrible cases to go through, because they were seed to sale. They had the farm and they had the retail and they had the distribution and the manufacturing in the middle. And they were using Eagle 20 on about 20% of their farm. And some people, they didn't get sick, but if you smoke Eagle 20, it forms into hydrogen cyanide in small doses and small levels. And all they did was learn about it. It didn't hurt them. They know that they didn't really have any cases where they had to go to the hospital. All they did was learn about it, and they sued them, and they were hurting for about a good 6 months. I mean, can you imagine not selling any product for 6 months? Some of these companies out here can't imagine selling product for 6 days. They'd be hurting. So it's gets pretty crazy on that side. And
then is there a carryover to business interruptions? What's caused by what? And I can tell you from my own personal experience, where I was representing someone in a sort of a mass tort situation, which products turns out to be somebody's hurt, and it may not be numbers. There's a lot of people along the line that touched it, or it could be large numbers of people hurt. You're sitting in a room with 10, 15, 20 other lawyers taking the depots of the experts who are going to point fingers at you in trial and trying to figure out my risk. And I got my claims adjuster on the phone. So I got 25,000 to start with. Yeah. And you keep hearing wonderful noises like, we didn't do that. Thank you very much. I'll throw in 10, 15, 20 for a release, and I'm going to give you seed money. And by the way, my buddy over there has got $2 million of risk. Have a nice day. I'll buy you a beer tonight.
Yeah.
That's how this goes. And real people are involved, but you lose control once someone sues you. And even the carrier understands that. But when your risk is involved with a certain system, arbitration or the court systems, you can punch numbers for some of those risks. For these operators, they're like shocked when I tell them war stories about what can happen to you. Or I walk into one of their facilities, and I did this at a lab, and I'm just there because organic chemistry was 40 something years ago. I want to look at these gas chromatographs and I want to go, what is it? How do you prepare your samples? So I make some sense of this, and I'm pointing at stuff and going, well, you can't taking a picture of that. Well, why? Because if somebody says it was not what you claimed it was, and I have to defend you, a picture is very helpful. Well, I never thought about that. Well, no shit, Sherlock. You're not thinking about how do I cover my risk. You're thinking of how do I make money.
Bingo.
And so I spend a lot of time trying to educate people that we're going to build what we call an endogenous system here, well-contained, that you know how it runs, you know what your risk is, where you look for answers to those questions that I just got. My truck driver called me, got into an accident, boom, who do we let know? What are we exposed to? Those kinds of conversations include necessarily you. Okay.
Yeah.
Because if here's my system, take a look, JJ, tell me where I'm at risk and what can you do to help me before you start paying someone like me. Because if you got insurance, the insurance company pays my freight. But if you don't, you're gonna bleed dry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One hit in this industry pretty much crushes you.
Yeah.
And at point we've been writing, I'll probably say that the trickiest thing that I've had to explain to people are we've been taking in a lot of CBD brands. And we have these packages that are designed specifically for CBD brands. They cover the general liability, they cover product liability, they even cover some contract protection, because really, as a CBD brand, think about your risks. You're retailing to a client, so it's your name on the product, right?
Mm-hmm.
So who gets hit first? You do. They think you make it. They think that you make 100% of it. But really what it is you're contracting out to a manufacturer,
white label,
who's making exactly to a manufacturer who's making your product. So what I usually say is, show me who's making that product, and I want to see a certificate of insurance from them so I can see what carriers are coming from them. And I've had a few conversations with brands where I'm going, listen, I don't recognize these companies on this, that this manufacturer has covering CBD. Maybe they make a bunch of products and now they decide to kind of throw some CBD in there. But just know that if you get a claim, where's that lawyer going to look for the money? Is it going to be for that manufacturing company that has to probably dole it out themselves? Or is it going to be your insurance policy that is specifically designed to pay CBD claims? And that's really the hardship of it. And I'm going, well, you're the one that's going to be dragged into it. But I didn't make the product. It doesn't matter. The lawyer's going to keep on drilling you because you're the one with the coverage. And that's the hard part about it, is people need to really look at how the control gets taken away. I really like how you say that, because it's like you don't have control. Once you get sued, like, you might as well just take a seat and let it roll, because you're going to be filled with a room with people that know what they're doing. You don't. And you just kind of got to write it and see what happens on the other end and hope that you have a company at the end of the day.
Well, I try to explain to people there's a place to put your money, and I'm relatively cheap if we front end and design the risk. So then you can sit down and have a glass of wine, smoke your blunt while you get calls from your adjuster telling you, yeah, listen, we found out, but we got you covered to this level. It's going to be fine. And you're not worried about it. The other end of it's just not very good. Now, one of the things that I discovered, I defended physicians and hospital groups and things like that. And the Medical Practices Act has a certain level of behavior you've got to comply with. Okay. And if you're below that level of behavior, you risk a negligence claim, which is what malpractice is. But I found that there's a certain level of, activities people have where the state is not capable of controlling them, but the insurance industry damn sure is. Okay. And an example, I have a surgeon that I represented for like 4 cases, and I think I got lucky, but I got his ass out of all 4 of them. Nice. And he was real bold. You can't tell me I can't be doing that, until the hospital said, yeah, but you got to have malpractice insurance to be able to cut here. And all the carriers went, don't be looking this way, buddy. We know what happened to you. So one of the things that I know happens is that insurance runs business. Without insurance, you're rolling craps, and you could come out snake eyes, and, you could be done. So insurance adds a layer of protection that most people who've been slanging weed never thought about. Yeah. So I like your thoughts on what you think the future is going to be as policies get written, and where the insurance industry will tighten up some of the, I don't want to call it nonsense, but the things going on right now in the industry that are kind of loosely run. What's your thoughts on that, JJ?
My thoughts are that the premiums have kind of stayed the same. The coverages have broadened, and they're starting to kind of expand a little bit more, but it's becoming more streamlined and marketable. It's going to be like writing an auto shop is going to be, or a bakery is going to be the same as writing a dispensary. And so that's kind of becoming the standard. The only part that gets really complicated is dealing with somebody like a cultivator, because they have so many different exposures in so many different areas. It kind of treats more like the ag side of it. And the ag industry has insurances that kind of come all over the board. So we're liking the fact that things are opening up. but the policies are still really, really strict. One thing I can say is like probably like the landlord coverages is kind of the easiest way to kind of point towards that. And as a landlord, you're used to getting a policy that has all these bells and whistles. You're covered from your tenants, you're covered from what your tenants do and from all these causes and issues. But the moment your tenant's a cannabis tenant, then you have to go get a new insurance policy, and it doesn't really cover that much stuff because these carriers don't really look into that side of it. The carriers want to focus on the people that have permits. All these ancillary guys that are covering cannabis that their normal policies don't, like you guys, you know, the policies aren't as great and as grand as what you can get if you weren't supporting the cannabis industry. So to the consultants, to the lawyers, to the insurance guys, you know, our policies aren't that fantastic. You know, they're not, they'll cover a lot of what we're doing, and at least they'll step in and cover some of the basics. But the biggest problem I've probably seen besides the landlord side is the directors and officers coverage. It's just terrible. I mean, the better way about putting it, there's not a lot of coverage there. It's a lot of coverage. I mean, I've written some up to about $5 million in protection when it comes to board coverage, but it's not great. I mean, if you were doing widgets, if you're doing anything but cannabis, your D&O coverage would have been great. But because you're playing this high risk game and you're dealing with an industry that's getting off the ground when it comes to some of this more complicated stuff that deals with contracts and tort law, like you mentioned, it's not great coverage right now. There's so much work that needs to still be done in there, and there's so much kind of these carriers need to start stepping up in there. We had one recent carrier, which I won't name who, that when the stock market really took a hit there about a few months ago, we heard that they lost about 30% of their net just instantly, and and they were pretty much one of the leaders in D&O, and they just started cutting back completely. They didn't want to offer any more coverages. I don't even think we don't really try to shop them for professional coverage anymore, just because they just kind of took all these hits and there's these problems, and that's really what they're fearing. And that's why they had it. We even had some different coverages in there that kind of help investors too. So there's still these interesting little parts and bits that they don't want to play. But for the most part, if you own a cannabis license, expect things to start getting more streamlined. I think that maybe in 5 years, you can call up a farmer's agent and they might have a cannabis policy for you, you know? So,
well, I was recently brought into a failing license holder out of the Bay Area, and it didn't take long to figure out that this was a piss poorly run organization, and they probably had lost their corporate veil because they didn't even have basics going on. And so a company like that might have a not asked too many questions D&O policy issued, when the claim gets made and they start looking and you go, well, but there's exclusions for intentional wrongful acts. Okay, there's exclusions for regulatory violations, and you start looking at the things that are going to cause them grief. What I'm trying to do when I onboard clients is figure out, can you run a business? Okay, and I'm not talking about slanging weed. Do you know what it means to have a shareholder meeting? And I can tell you, we'll talk offline about the experience Heather and I had with people vaping in the parking lot and coming in and trying to run a shareholder or director meeting, and you just think, no. But one of the things that while we're still talking about, got a few more minutes here, is that the metrics they use to determine their risk, that's where the people running the company need to understand those metrics, because that's where insurance is going to dictate how businesses ultimately get run. Because if you run it in the ground, you make a claim, they go, sorry, we ain't going to pay. And the next time they're asked to write a policy, maybe they add a couple more questions onto their broker questionnaire. Like, maybe I want to see your corporate structure. I want to, take a look at some other things. I'm having the same questions from investors because, you know me, I'm afraid to tell you what I think.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, don't ask me what I think. Okay. And so the investors have taken a bath because they just dumped a truck full of money into knuckleheads' hands and then weren't watching. Okay.
Exactly.
So the investor issues, if there's insurance for that, I would like to chat with more about you offline, because we're working on a group that does due diligence for investors. And one of the concerns is, how do you secure these investments? And I'm scratching hard about receiverships and how do I get the land that's on, that's, waiting for something to really die and come in and pick up everything, not just the lease, but the land that's sitting on the buildings. But if there's policies that might be available for investors, that will begin to sweeten the pot. But those metrics, what are those metrics they're using to put down a policy for an investor?
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot that you're saying, because we get called in some of these meetings where not only do you have an investor relation trying to come in there and just make sure that, the standards of insurance are there, but then do they have good board coverage? Do they have good E&O coverage? Because some of the contracts they're dealing with might go sideways, and they want to make sure they're protected on that side. There's the other side of it is that we get corporate buyout meetings. And I think I had one situation where I had to put a 6-year tail on one of these policies just because they didn't trust them. They didn't see what they were doing. So they were like,
I'm shocked.
They're like, yo, can we get a large tail on that one?
Yeah,
because we don't know what instability that they were running, because it only went legal a few years ago. And so what were they doing, before then? And the concern is, can they just shut down shop and operate a new corporate and move assets real quick and try to get that over just because they want to sever liability completely? There's a lot of techniques that these investors got to move in on. I'd probably say that the main thing that they're concerned about is, do they have some sort of liability coverage? Do they have some sort of protection for, buildings and assets and all that kind of stuff, just in case for just normal standard losses? And then the other side is, how soon can we put a directors and officers policy on there? The issue I think that we run up against is that some of that stuff kind of adds up real quick. And it ain't coming from the cannabis company to pay for that stuff. It's usually coming from the investor's pockets. So I'd probably say, I don't know, if I had to guess, maybe 75% of the time, they don't buy it. Like, they're just looking at the pricing for to cover directors and officers in the cannabis space, or, in the cannabis space. And they're like, yeah, now's not the time, like maybe we'll do something later. And, they think that they have enough lawyers, or they have enough kind of risk mitigation themselves, maybe hold harmless or something in the contract that can kind of help protect them. The other side that I would touch is, to your point, is these guys a lot of the cannabis people aren't coming from risk. So the first thing that you notice is they think that their stuff doesn't smell. That's the first thing they say. It's like, I'm not going to have a problem. I'm not going to have any issues. Like, I've never had an issue before. And it's like, well, you've also never been a company before. So that's also the other side of it. So, you can't have, somebody kind of slinging dope out in the parking lot, and then they go, man, I'm going to sue you. And you're like, what are you talking about? I'm just slinging dope in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Well, nowadays, you're slinging dope out of a dispensary, and anybody that walks through that door can easily bring litigation to you. And you will not have a company the next year. It just won't be a thing, because you're barely struggling as is to pay your bills now. So how are you going to afford the lawsuit? So this is kind of what we keep on explaining to people. But I would say that some of my insureds, about a year after we've been working with them, it really starts sinking in, and we just start seeing endorsements come up. People start going, how much cannabis inventory do I have, or how much product do I have on the road coverage, or do I have any computer related losses, because we have a lot of cyber, issues that we might be having, or maybe somebody might take our medical history or something like that from our clients. And that's where things really start sinking in for these guys. They start kind of getting that business acumen underneath their belt after they've been running it for a while, and saying, okay, we need to start insuring ourselves up. And as working with you for a long time, where we started, what do we do? Like, we just basically educated the crap out of people coming down from the mountain for years and years and years, just saying, guys, this is what's going to take. This is, what's going to take. And that stuff just kind of, they want to see it to believe it. And so really it's when they start hearing about it, they start looking at it. And to this day, my book has been really, really healthy when it comes to claims free, and people have been pretty good. I just think the industry is still kind of new too. So there's not a lot of lawsuits kind of coming around. Some of the bigger stuff has happened. I'll tell you a quick story real quick. I don't know if you guys actually know this one. I had my first claim was a guy that was doing an indoor grow, and his light caught fire to the building.
Oh,
and it caught the whole thing up. He didn't have plants inside yet. He just went through the permit process, was doing his build out, and the whole thing went up in flames. And sure enough, because I was a cannabis agency, caught wind of the news to go do an interview with me. And so there I am on the news talking about, you know, indoor grows and liability and how fires work. And they're like, should cities be concerned because there's a lot of like potential for indoor fire and stuff like that? And here I am kind of saying, well, indoor fire and employee theft are like the number one things that happen to businesses when it comes to claims. So really, you know, I'm not so sure right now. It's just more of a standard thing when you see that kind of stuff. And I'm side by side as I'm watching the news later with my face on it, and there's my client's building being caught on fire. and it's just like, oh my
Depression,
goodness. So,
right? Yeah,
right,
I didn't
exactly,
know,
right
but
across
I
the
knew.
board.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we kind of educate them and just go, listen, this is going to be kind of like standard insurance. They'd maybe not look at claims at the end of the year and see kind of what's common, but you know, just kind of be concerned about just standard business losses, be concerned about your employees stealing stuff, be concerned about some theft issues from outside people, because a lot of you guys hold more money than sometimes a bank down the street. And then the other side is just be worried about fire. I mean, fire is super, super common. And I'd probably say specifically right now, because everybody's staying at home or there's a lot of technology in play. You know, try to think about your cyber protections. Try to think about what you're being covered for you know, kind of getting hacked. And I would say that if you have any medical history or any medical data, if you've sold any medical use cannabis out there, know that stuff will get you in such hot water so fast the moment you get hacked, because you're leaking medical data. And so that's kind of the standards of what we're looking forward when it comes to like loss mitigation and stuff like that. So,
Well, we had a discussion with a client not long ago about putting together the intellectual property part of their business. They're up and running. They're doing certain things. Now they want to go to another state, and the discussions were, okay, we're going to bring in my intellectual property guy, and we're going to start at the bottom with all market locally. We're going to get as much as we can interstate, and to explain the rollout of how you protect the intellectual property when you can't go to the feds and register it as a cannabis brand, but you can make a hat with it on. You can't have it attached to cannabis. So I'm curious about what you see coming that might cover intellectual property. And I mean, my purpose is to bring in the experts to start with, to build up, trademark as much as you can, register this stuff, help me with protecting intellectual property. If you have contracts for leasing and things like that, let's make sure we're not just pulling one out of our ass and throwing something out there. Let's make sure the people who would actually defend you are helping to build this. But I don't, you know, intellectual property insurance is one that piqued my interest when you mentioned that. So what's out there right now, JJ, if anything?
Well, that is one thing that I'm actually trying to work on is that's kind of my next venture here in 2020, is trying to shore up the type of IP coverage, because that is kind of that last little bit that I haven't been able to kind of secure. And I want to be able to provide as much as I can for the insurance industry for insurability, but IP coverage is just lacking. I mean, there's not many carriers that we've found that just want to step up. So we're working right now with a few lawyers in the space that are versed on this, and see if they have any carriers that kind of want to step in here and work with us and go, listen, as we kind of get more people that are interested, would you be willing to come in? And it's only going to come in one of two ways. It's going to come in if you have a large company with large assets that wants to cover a lot of IP, as some of these Colorado companies kind of can affirm to that, because they have these special formulations that they've spent a lot of money, and now they're branching out to other states, as well as maybe a few California and Washington ones. But we haven't kind of shored that upside kind of up yet on that, getting that carry to come in. The other side is getting kind of the large numbers. If we had a bunch of clients that were all concerned about IP coverage and all begging for it, we could probably get a carrier to come in here and saying, okay, we'll cover it this way, but know that it's going to come with a high premium. Know that it's going to be very, very limited, because unless you're doing something with a team of lawyers, you're trying to get some sort of trademarks in here, you're logging as much data as you can to say that it is yours, then that's really where you got to start. So I would probably say if you're looking towards IP coverage, either look maybe later in the year or next year. In the meantime, try to find some sort of representation that can just start getting everything down on paper. Try to file things with third parties is a better way about putting it. There's was it like the Appalachian group? I think it is.
I'm part of that group.
Exactly. So, and there's one up in Oregon, up in Grants Pass as well, that's starting to get together for all the hemp farmers up there, just to try to put everything you can down. I won't speak on, places like Phylos Bioscience, where you want to put in your lot on maybe some of these third parties that you got to really be understanding what they might be doing with your data, but make sure that you have good legal representation when you're giving a third party your data, so that they can truly log it, truly have it independently studied, or put in a position that they can claim it and tied to as you, so that when you do trademark it, or you say, hey, that guy ripped off my so-and-so, you can start moving forward. I probably say like the most notable brand, like the one thing that kind of concerned me was, you have the cookie train out there, right? The Girl Scout cookies, and that's one of those things where it's like, how do you cover against that? Because we know people that mix that stuff with all of their strains and maybe a few other strains of people that we know, and then they make a new strain. And is that protected? Is that a brand new strain? Can you honestly, truly protect the cannabinoids? What if you have some of these other companies who are making your strain, but they're not doing it from the cannabis plant? Maybe they're using algae, or maybe there's something, some type of synthetics that is still technically Girl Scout cookies, but it's not made from the cannabis plant. Where does the protection lie there, and how are they going to protect against that? So there's so many different variants in there that I'm trying to dig through, and I'm trying to understand and see, okay, well, what protection can we have here, and what legal protection can we have here? And does it all just come down to trademarking, with the government, trying to get as best you can? And can you do the plant trademark through the utility patents? And there's many variants for that. So trying to set precedents. I think Charlotte's Web did it, right? Charlotte's Web was one of the first that did patenting, their strain. And trying to follow what they did, and trying to kind of go down that line, I think would be great for these cultivators, and especially the THC cultivators, for sure.
Well, the discussions that I've had invariably take it down to the genetics, because if you're going to go in and have a fight over something, and two people are claiming they have, cookies, whatever or OG Kush, whatever one of these landrace strains were, and they do a genetic survey of it, it turns out that your genetics are more like some other strain, does that give you a leg up? And right now it's very difficult to go in and patent those genetics. Exactly. Because it's an illegal plant and you need the federal protection. But what you see the geneticists doing is they go into a set of genetics, and they'll send a virus in to make a small little change in it. Now, I've patented something because it's not natural now.
Yeah,
that's the Monsanto model. And that, man, the panties that get into a wad when you start talking about doing that in this industry, people want to shoot you. Okay.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about protecting intellectual property, if you make a change that doesn't change the basic expressive genetics, all it is a little marker that it's mine now. How are you going to handle that? Because it's been domination by people who do that. I want to protect my rights, therefore you can't use it. If I find you do that, I'm going to go sue you. Monsanto really did lock up corn and some things like that in a bad way. And another thing that I want to just say, because it makes me chuckle, is they got a utility patent for marijuana. Okay, and when you read the description of what it does, every marijuana plant I've ever smoked in my life did the exact same thing. They gave them a utility patent for it.
Yeah.
And you start thinking, wow, when somebody goes in and really challenges that and say, nah, there's not enough, too much descriptive stuff that you can't really patent, and not enough that's unique enough to that to patent. So there's a lot more to be done. And my buddy's just coming back. He went to Turin, Italy to study international intellectual property, get another master's degree in IP. He got stuck there in the, the COVID-19. So he's on his way back. And I've warned him, dude, when you get back in, I got some work for you. And these are some of the questions that I have for him. And we can do this again, JJ. If not, I want to pass information along as I find it so that you can give me feedback. And if you can find policies, I can then advise people and see if we can shore up the risks that kill most businesses.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. I'm super adamant about that IP coverage. I think it's just the biggest fight that's coming out there. People that are just gonna, as soon as you start seeing these people rise to the cream, kind of rising to the top, and you're gonna have these people that have a brand name. And I kind of saw something on LinkedIn the other day, and it was really, really curious. It kind of drew my attention. I was like, that kind of made me think. And somebody said, what brand name do you know in cannabis is out there that anybody in any state would know? And people started commenting, and one comment got the most likes, and I just had to agree with it. And they said, zero, nobody. Nobody's a brand name right now. Because if you go talk to anybody out there, only if you're in the industry or circling around it, then you know the brand names. But most people just know it still as marijuana. Mm-hmm. So when that stuff starts coming out, and I think we still have some time, but when it starts coming out, like, it's going to be, you don't go ripping off Coke. You just don't do that. You don't rip off Coca-Cola without some sort of heavy detrimental, issue. And everybody in the world will tell you no, but that takes a long time to build. So I think we have time. I think we have time to get going on that. And it's just going to be some little bickering back and forth and some legal allegations. But I definitely want to keep that IP going. And get that coverage going, because those are going to be needed for some of these bigger companies that are just super strong about building a brand, and they want to be the strongest in the game for it. And it's such a fight to the top. So those guys are the ones that are going to be kind of barking for it. And then all the little guys below are going to start realizing that they need to shore up too. So, anyway, I'd love to do this again. That was great. I appreciate it.
I have a question, and I just want to say this has been great because the vast majority of the questions that I had were answered between the two of you. So I'm just been sitting here listening and learning. But I'm seeing a lot of, we touched upon with COVID-19, maybe you have an interruption of your business, but I'm seeing across social media that there are some people who are working from home. And so I'm wondering, because that changes the environment, obviously from a work comp perspective, but from your policy, if you are now employing somebody and they are, you're taking on a certain risk, because if they get hurt while they're talking on the phone, not paying attention, fall down a flight of stairs, something like that. I used to work, I worked against him in work comp. I worked on the applicant side. He worked in the defense side. It was fun at the dinner table, but I always think about that from the perspective of applicants. And there was, I've even seen, we had one case where the woman sat down and pinched her buttocks in a toilet seat and filed a work comp claim for that because she was injured while on the job. And so, there's minute, ridiculous things that can happen, but there are legitimate things can happen. If you're talking to somebody, hosting a business meeting, you're hosting a conference call, something of that nature, and you're injured while you're working from home, that complicates the situation tremendously. So I'm wondering if you've had any of your people that you're working with reach out to you and try to talk to you about, do I have coverage? I now have somebody working from home. And if not, what should those people, if they have insurance, what should they be doing if they've got maybe a handful of employees? Because as we move past this, the governor may allow us to open some portions of our state back up. But we're realistically, being told we're not going to see some sort of vaccine for about 1.5 years. And that means there's going to be some level of us needing to be careful and somewhat social distance. And I think we're going to see a lot more people, if you have a position, sales position, something like that, that you can work from home and say, allow for a larger distance for people that absolutely have to come in to operate something. I think that we're going to see business owners probably start gravitating towards that. So what should they be doing from the insurance perspective in order to increase their coverages? Is there even coverage for that out there, especially for the cannabis industry? That's kind of probably my biggest interest right now. What do you think?
That's a really, yeah, no, that's actually a really good question. Yeah, we do have, in the cannabis industry, we have already a lot of people that have kind of progressed forward and are working from home. And there are lines in your workers' comp that shows that you're not on that certain premises. Maybe you're doing some sort of outside sales. Maybe your office worker is working from home and not from the typical office or the business that you have. Most manufacturers and retailers are kind of doing their same thing. They're going into the manufacturing spot to work. They're going in the distribution center to work. So we've already kind of taken advantage of kind of what their operations are when it comes to outside work, and being able to kind of have those workers' comp policies reflect that. For your standard industry people, your workers' comp is for your premises. So if you have people that are transitioning outside and now they're working from home, you're definitely right. They can absolutely put in some sort of claims, and you could not have some coverage there because they weren't working on the premise. When you write workers' comp for an office person, the kind of the joke in workers' comp is, are they chained to the desk? Because they cannot leave the desk. If they go get hurt moving a box downstairs or they're doing something else, you just don't have coverage. And that's really a heavy concern. People run up against that all the time if you've ever been through a comp claim for office workers. We had a non-cannabis risk out of Vegas. They were one of the largest distributors for an alcohol company. And it was interesting because we actually were working on a workers' comp right during this time. And we were like, what happened? Like, we were working on a workers' comp, and then everything kind of changed and the whole workers' comp shifted. And the interesting thing is they turned all these people that didn't have to be at the distribution center, because they had a large array of office workers that were running all these trucks and all these routes and all this technical stuff. Well, now they're all working from home. So they took a complete pivot shift and created a consulting company that then rehired everybody underneath that so that they could all work from home, in a total different pivot. So be prepared that your company structure could shift, and you need to really work with somebody that understands how to corporate, kind of, if you have a large array of employees there, to kind of move things around and get your understanding of what an employee counts as when they're working from home. Is that a true employee, or is that now working for another company that your company owns that now manages outside office help? And it's totally different. It shifts completely. I mean, some of these companies that have maybe $10 million in payroll a year, that half your workforce is now working from home, they're moving. I mean, they're shifting, and they're trying to kind of make sure that things are shoring up, because it's a completely different beast when these guys aren't coming in and clocking on the 9 to 5 like they were. And you can take away models like the way kind of Google does it, where they have task orientation and their way of handling things, and Zoom meetings and stuff like that when it comes to achieving the goals that need to happen for the operations. And it's very unprecedented, to your point right there. Vaccine or not, people, even with these states trying to reopen right now and into the next month, they just don't want to go back to work. They don't want to go back and be up against people for their own health and safety, because maybe you tested negative for COVID at this time and you really don't want it. So should you go back to work, or you're being forced about to go to work, and what's it going to look like to your company when you're outside of that? And it does get kind of crazy. You have an interesting thing, I think, was it called the Darwin Awards, where people do stupid things at home and then they sue people for them, or they on personal properties and stuff like that. So it's always interesting when you hear about that kind of stuff. We the easiest way that we kind of pertain that to is if you're doing, we have a thing called hired non-owned auto that we have for people, where even if you're using your own company or using your own personal vehicle, and you have to have, you have to move around for the company, usually an auto claim isn't covered in that direction. And
Right.
most people kind of butt up against that. So you can kind of mimic that to where an employee is doing the same thing. So it's you got to be understanding of your risk there and think about outside sourcing for your workers' comp related claims.
So the moral of the story is anybody who's got now employees working from home and they hadn't thought about it should probably call their insurance broker and try and figure out what in the heck do I need to do in order to increase my coverage, because this is not going to end anytime soon. I don't think. I mean, I have a compromised immune system, so I don't care if if the governor opens the state up, I'm still going to be a little bit hesitant to go out and around people, because you can pass this virus without having symptoms, and that makes me a little bit fearful. So I see all these news reports where all these employers are like, yeah, I get that our governor is going to open the state in other states, but I just don't want to make my employees choose between their job and making money and paying their bills and their life. That's not fair to do. So we're going to see the pivot. So I'm assuming there is coverage out there that includes, people working from home. Interestingly enough, I also participate in a group of paralegals that telecommute, that work from home, and they do project-oriented, like you're saying, project-oriented types of things for specific law firms. They're all paralegals that do different types of law, and they're all contractors, so they are not necessarily working as employees. So I'm wondering if that's going to have to be, you can't work for a cannabis company and be anything but an employee. So that's going to be a complication. But I think that these businesses really need to be seeking out some advice from their insurance people and from their attorneys on how do I pivot with this, and don't just assume, oh, it's fine that they're working from home, because if something happens, it may not be fine. So my 2 cents.
Right.
There's a specific exclusion for pinching your ass cheek at home versus at work. I'm hoping, because I don't want to. I've seen too many 8x10 color glasses when I'm defending this case. Like, I'll never get that out of my head. Oh my God, why do I have to see?
Yeah, and I think the easiest part is, am I covered for off-premises situations? Am I covered? Is this policy only going to cover me at my workplace? You know, and that's really what the question is. And as long as we can kind of explain that, and then we can go back to the carrier and go, hey, things have changed. What are we going to do? I'm really curious to see, how all this kind of plays out, and I hope everybody kind of gets back to some normalcy. But as long as we kind of step forward and use our digital tools in front of us to move forward, everything else will follow. Insurance will follow, regulation will follow. We just have to find people leading the way and taking that risk, and we'll try to be there to protect them on the back end as best as we can, and hopefully you guys can be there to defend them.
Yep.
All right, JJ. Well, as always, thanks, and we'll stay in touch, and we'll do this again. Okay.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, sir.
Awesome. Thanks.
Have a good one.